Ross, it's your turn.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So Suzanne asked me to do a presentation on electromagnetics, specifically 5G, but we're going to cover a lot of material. My understanding is we have a couple of hours, and I'm going to probably occupy the first 40 minutes. And then Magda Havas, Dr. Magda Havas will take over, and I know she will have some remarkable information, as she always does. So I don't know, I haven't done share screen, but I'm going to do that. Okay, so, okay, I'm disabled from sharing screen. Is there any way we can get my PowerPoint up?
Yes.
How do we do that? Can you enable my share screen?
Yes, you should be able to share screen now.
Okay, we want to share that one. Oh, hang on. Okay, can we see that one?
Yes, can.
All right. And I'm going to go to, just hang on a sec. I've got to get this off here. There we go. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So it's just a little bit about me to start. I graduated in 1976 from chiropractic, 1982 from naturopathic, and 2012 from osteopathic. And I have been doing live blood evaluations since 1995. I have now done over 8,000 of them, and I could talk for a few hours about that, but all I will say about that is that since the COVID vax program started, we have been seeing some very strange things in the blood in virtually everybody, which is slightly alarming, to say the least. Because we've done, I don't know how many, maybe 100 or so vaxxed people, and we've done a lot of unvaxxed people as well, and we are seeing the same things in all of these. Now, if any of you are paying attention to what's going on in this world, you will want to look at Dr. Anna Mihalcia's work, which is quite fantastic. She's doing amazing research, and she's finding ways to clear this stuff out of people, and we're working on that as well. So we want to welcome you, fellow lab rats. Isn't he cute? And we want you to be all ears. I know this one is a very strange slide, but the reason I have it in here is because this is incredibly important material, and I'm going to talk about my own personal experience first. This is an MRI taken of my head in January of 2019 at the Kelowna General Hospital. Now, if you look at this, there are some interesting features here. There's a strange light-colored gray mass in the middle there, and that is actually a brain tumor. The other strange thing about this MRI, actually, this is not an MRI, I'm sorry, this is a CT scan. The MRI came later. The other interesting thing about this CT scan is the difference in the two sides of the brain. The left side of this slide is a normal brain picture. The right side looks very different because the tumor was affecting many, many different things in my brain at the time. Needless to say, this was removed at Kelowna General Hospital, and with a remarkable brain surgeon who I presume is still there. I don't know. But if anyone has a challenge with their nervous system such as this, he would be the guy to see for sure. And if you're really queasy, you might want to close your eyes because the next picture is a little rough. That is me after the removal of that tumor. Now, it was a 5-hour surgery. When you go into brain surgery, it's a little bit terrifying, to say the least, because they're going to mess with your master computer, and you don't know what you're going to be like when you wake up. So one of the goals of this presentation is that you never have to go through this, because it wasn't fun. So this is what we call the electromagnetic spectrum, and this is the basic science, and I urge everybody to do your own research on this. The electromagnetic spectrum is pretty amazing. The things that we are talking about today are microwaves in the gigahertz range, which is what has happened now with the evolution of cellular technology. It's gone from 1G all the way up now to 6G, and apparently they're working on 7. I'm not sure exactly what that is, and maybe Magda can talk to that. I don't know. But we're looking today at the 5G issue, which is now spreading rapidly throughout North America. Thankfully, in Mexico, it is a rarity. It's in the largest cities. Guadalajara, Mexico City, and Monterrey have it, and apparently some of the smaller centers are looking at getting it. But it's a very interesting thing to look at this spectrum, which goes all the way up into extremely high levels of hertz, and we're into nuclear, X-rays, radioactive sources, gamma rays, which we are all exposed to on a regular basis. One of the reasons that people that fly in airplanes at high altitude tend to have a lower life expectancy is because of gamma radiation. And I measured that radiation with my Geiger counter about 6 or 7 years ago on a flight to Ontario from British Columbia. And the levels of radiation at 38,000 feet were about 35 times what they were in Kelowna. So pilots generally tend to get certain forms of cancer. They get brain cancer, they get throat cancer, prostate, ovarian if they're females, and most pilots are male for certain reasons as far as the way they function visually. But pilots have a lower life expectancy, and a lot of the people who have flown at high altitude, including the in-service people, such as some of my cousins, tend to age very quickly and have numerous health challenges that other people don't, who don't fly a lot at high altitude. So we're looking at today the gigahertz range in the 5G area. I got my first cell phone in 1993, and actually I have it here. I'm going to show it to you after we're done with the PowerPoint presentation. So what we're looking at is something that has many different names, and the names don't really matter. It's called all kinds of things, but it's all the same radiation, it's all the same frequencies, and it has the same effect on all of us. We are biological organisms that are affected Just like a lab rat is affected by radiation, so are we. And unfortunately, our levels of exposure have gone up exponentially in the last few years. So electropollution consists of a number of different components which can interact and all affect us in different ways. Largely, they affect the nervous system, which is one of the major problems with what we're dealing now, also with the immune system and the effect that these have on suppressing the immune system or just confusing it. So we've got magnetic fields, which are extremely dangerous. They're rare, but they are dangerous and very difficult to shield. Electric fields, which contain toxic frequencies and body voltage, are easier to remedy, but they are more common, and almost all of us are exposed to those. And there are some very simple remedies to deal with electric fields, some of which are ridiculously simple and free. Dirty electricity is contained within the electric fields, and these are frequencies that actually affect our nervous system and our immune system and other systems in our bodies in aberrant ways. And dirty electricity is rampant. Dr. Sam Milham is the one who brought this to the forefront, writing a book called Dirty Electricity. And in it, he talks about the epidemiology of the introduction of various technologies into our world and the epidemics of certain diseases that followed extremely closely after the introduction of each one of those technologies. And this is what is still happening. And the introduction of 5G has its own challenges and its own epidemics as well. This is a really important word in this world of electromagnetic radiation. The word is cumulative. And the reason it's important is because of the increase in quantity, degree, or force by successive additions. What it means is the longer we are exposed, the more dramatic the effect. And each exposure has a cumulative effect from the last exposure, not unlike smoking cigarettes, where each cigarette builds on the last one and can eventually lead to a significant health challenge that can end your life. And there are numerous other things that cause cumulative buildups of damage to the body. The biggest issue is the damage to our DNA. And there are reams and reams of research about electromagnetic radiation damaging our DNA in ways that disrupt it. I call it DNA disruption, and eventually lead to cancer. Part of my situation with my 3 incidents of cancer, I know was cell phone radiation, because I wasn't listening to my own advice at that point in time. And I was a very busy naturopath with thousands of patients who needed to get in touch with me for emergencies at times, and 2 teenage boys who also needed to talk to me. And so I had a cell phone starting fairly early, and was exposed to certain forms of cell phone radiation at levels that I should not have been. And in some ways, I guess I kind of sacrificed my health for the good of others, which was maybe wise and unwise at the same time. So this is a very important word, because cumulative is what is happening to all of us right now. This is the other important word in this world: proximity, the state of being near in space or time, which means the closer you are to the source of the radiation, the stronger the radiation and the more damaging it is. And pretty well everybody who has a smartphone knows that holding it up to the side of your head might not be a good idea, because within about 30 seconds, you can feel the side of your head heating up. And some people get other strange symptoms, headaches, visual disturbances, and many other things happening if they are foolish enough to hold that smartphone up to the side of your head to talk on it. And when you think that the range of a smartphone is about 5 miles, there's a really large amount of radiation coming off that device. And actually, the strange thing is, it turns your head into an antenna. The water and other liquids in your brain. Excuse me, we've got lots of traffic noise here. The water and other liquids in your brain actually become an antenna, and the range of your smartphone is actually longer when you hold it up to the side of your head than if you hold it on speakerphone or a few feet away, which is what you should do. So the proximity you are to the radiation source is always an important factor. And one of the real kickers on this is the proximity to a cell tower of your home. Homes in certain states in the United States that are too close to a cell tower have a value decrease of between 30 and 40%, because it becomes more difficult to find somebody who wants to buy that home if they know it's close to a cell tower. Now, I want to tell an interesting story because I lived in West Kelowna for many, many years. And I lived on Thacker Drive, if anyone knows where that is. And I moved out of there. It's a number of years ago. I think it was April of 09, might have been 08. It's all a blur. And the readings in that house where we lived were pretty good at the time. We moved in April over to the Hall Road area where the readings were even better. And between May and October of that year, they installed 18 microcells in that neighborhood. It was, I think, in the fall, and I was doing an inspection, and I pulled up the cell phone map on my smartphone to show a client where the cell towers were in relation to their residence. And I pulled up the map of West Kelowna, and there were 18 cell towers in the neighborhood where I had lived. So I drove over there the next day to check this out. And sure enough, these were small, about 2 feet by 2 feet by about 6 inches deep microcells that had been installed on towers or on poles, hydro poles, in that neighborhood. One of them was 160 feet from the house I had lived in. The other one was 60 feet from the house I had lived in. The good news is that the one 60 feet away was facing away from that house. However, I did readings outside of the house and did some measurements. And that house that I lived in for, I think, about 4 years, I now consider uninhabitable. And I did inform the neighbors who I had become friends with that they might want to consider moving. However, they weren't interested and didn't seem to really care. And they were all in their 70s and figured they'd had a good life. So they decided to stay and not heed my advice. So proximity is an incredibly important word, and it's something everybody needs to take into consideration when looking at this concept. We are all biological. We are living organisms. We are all affected the same. Just like a rat or an insect or a bird, it doesn't matter. We're all biological organisms with DNA. Plants are affected as well. And that's a very strange one when plants don't grow properly because of radiation. One of the biggest factors is the effect of this radiation on our pollinators. And that is a huge issue, because if the pollinators die, we lose our food supply. And there's a lot of information about this available. I'm not going to talk much about it because you can do your own research. But we are biological organisms, all affected very similarly by toxic energies such as electromagnetic radiation. So we have 3 different categories of radiation: low frequency, which is magnetic and electric fields, which is a huge topic. That's 8 or 10 hours worth. High frequency, which is radio waves, which we've all been exposed to for decades and decades now. And now we have ultra high frequency, which is 5G, and now 6G coming up. And then we also have nuclear radiation, which hopefully we don't get exposed to in the near future, but there's all kinds of talk about, that. We have had nuclear accidents. There are 2 nuclear power plants very close to where I used to live in Ontario. And I had a number of clients that lived close to those nuclear power plants that had major health challenges because of their exposure to nuclear radiation, which is unfortunately something that's pretty difficult not to have if you're living near one of those nuclear power plants. So 5G, there is some interesting confusion, and I've written an article actually called 5G is not actually 5G, which is a confusing statement. But when I was doing EMF inspections in the Okanagan Valley, I would go into homes and we would talk about 5G, and people would say to me, well, it's already here. We already have it in our house. And, we see it on our Wi-Fi displays. And so this is what the G instead of what the F. Let's go back a second here. So there are 2 kinds of 5G, and I think that the industry did this intentionally to confuse people. There is 5G cellular and 5G Wi-Fi, and they are different. And the difference is that one is in your home and is being emitted by your Wi-Fi router. And I expect most of you have one of those in your home, unless you've figured out how to deal without Wi-Fi, which is not that difficult and is highly advisable. But 5G shows up. There are usually 2 different frequencies, 2.4G or 2.4 gigahertz as a carrier frequency for one of the channels on your Wi-Fi router. The other is 5G as a carrier frequency, and that 5G is 5 gigahertz. Now, if any of you have ever had a cordless phone, that cordless phone that some of you probably still have is the most dangerous thing in your house. And it will probably say 6G on the base unit. Now, the base unit of your cordless phone, if you still have one, is your own private cell tower that you have in your own home. And people don't like to hear that, but that is the truth about what a cordless phone is. It is the same technology as a cell tower down the street, but it's in your own home, and it is running 24/7. It never stops unless you turn it off. And it is the most dangerous thing you can have in your home. I believe that cordless phones are actually lethal and kill people. And I have seen situations where people have developed terminal illnesses because of their cordless phone, which sounds a little strange, but one case I had, because these things don't look dangerous until you actually measure with a meter the radiation coming off of them. You can't see the danger visually, but people will put the cordless phone base on their bedside table. Now, let me tell you about a friend of mine named John, who was having trouble sleeping, and his wife was a good friend of mine who actually worked for me at one time. And she said, would you come over and check our place? Because John can't sleep. He sleeps for an hour, then he gets up and he watches TV, and then he comes back to bed and he sleeps for an hour, and he's going downhill. His health is declining. He's really difficult to get along with, and I don't know if I want to stay married to him. So I said, sure, I'll come over. So we put my radio frequency meter on his pillow with a reading of 28,000 microwatts. Now, 28,000 microwatts is a lot when you consider that anything over 5 microwatts is actually damaging your DNA. So they lived in a condo, a townhouse condo, and the other side of the wall at the head of the bed was the adjoining condominium. The problem with this situation was they knew their neighbors, and their neighbors wanted nothing to do with limiting electromagnetic radiation. So the only solution for this was to paint the wall behind the head of the bed. So we painted that wall with shielding paint, which shields 99.997% of all radio frequency radiation. And we did a double layer, a fairly large area right behind the head of the bed. After we did this, we put the meter back on his pillow, and the reading was just over 20. So it went down from 28,000 to just over 20 microwatts. Most people can sleep reasonably well at that level. I like it below 5 personally, and my goal with clients was always to get it below 1, which we were frequently able to do. But John slept through the night for the first time in a very long time. And he had actually been a disbeliever in the whole thing until he woke up the next morning. And now he's a real proponent for reducing electromagnetic radiation of all sorts. It was quite profound, actually, the difference in that. And we've done many others of those in the Kelowna area. I could tell you stories for days about some of the things that we did to reduce radiation. But had he kept sleeping there and not done something about it, it could have affected him to the point where he got a serious fatal disease. And that's not uncommon to see that happens with people. So let's look at the technology and the disadvantages of 5G. It requires skilled engineers to install and maintain the network. Moreover, 5G equipment is costly, increases the cost of the deployment and maintenance phases. They are currently putting 5G towers up in the middle of the night. Why do they do that? Well, I think the reason's obvious. The smartphones are costly. It will take some time for the whole technology to get started and up and running, and everyone is going to need a new phone that can do 5G. Still under development, will take time before it's fully operational without any issues, because they are finding numerous issues. Coverage distance is up to 2 meters indoors and 300 meters outdoors. Because the gigahertz radiation is extremely labile, it's damaged by things like, or stopped or interfered with by things like rain, snow, fog, foliage. All of these things will interrupt. So they are now taking trees down in major cities en masse in order to increase the coverage of the 5G radiation. And there are security and privacy issues to be resolved in the 5G network as well. So I don't know if there are a number of people who are experts in this field who don't think they will ever get 5G fully up and running. I don't know about that myself, because there's so much money involved in the whole thing. But it is, strangely enough, I lived in the 2 cities that Canada uses to test technologies and other marketing issues. Peterborough, Ontario is one of those cities, and Kelowna, British Columbia is the other one. Strangely enough, I lived in both of those cities. And Kelowna got 5G very early on. I remember when they activated it downtown and people started getting sick and having headaches and visual disturbances and other things that were going on. I'm sure a number of people listening to this will remember that as well. But I think 5G is fully deployed in Kelowna by now. Can't imagine it's not. So this is the sign that should be up in the cities that have 5G, but of course it's not, because they don't want you to know it's dangerous, because there's a lot of money involved. So let's look at the evolution of 5G. 1970, 1984, 1G, which was analog. I remember with my first cell phone in Peterborough, Ontario, if I drove half a mile outside of the city limits, there was no coverage. And that's the way it was. 2G and 2.5 came in around 1980 through 1999. I got my first cell phone in 1993. And they brought in digital. My first cell phone was analog. Then 1990 to 2002, we got 3G, which was much faster, and you could now do texting and all sorts of other things with a wider bandwidth. 4G came in around 2000 to 2010 with much higher speeds, and that's what most of us have been existing with. Personally, I don't think I need anything faster than that for the work that I do on a stupid phone, but everyone wants 5G because it's bigger, better, faster, and I don't really know about all that, but because I'm still on 4G down here, but I know a lot of places are on 5G, and now we've got 6G coming in, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take before that technology is in place, or how it's going to be that much better, but I'm sure that there's an evolution, and I hear they're working on 7G now. What that will be, I don't know. Maybe that will just be mental telepathy. I know that sounds like a strange statement, but I think that's where we once were thousands of years ago, and where maybe we should go back to. So 5G has a number of different parts to it, and it can focus the beam, which is an interesting technology. I'm not really sure how it does that because this is not my world, but you can do your own research on all the different components of 5G and how it works. One of the biggest kickers is that your appliances can communicate with your smart meter in the house, and they will know everything about you, your electrical consumption, and when you dry your hair, and when you watch your TV, when you do your clothes. And these are things that a lot of people are concerned about. Some people don't care if they know what you're doing all the time. Personally, I think it's a horrific invasion of my privacy if they ever get to that point. But there are many other aspects to 5G that are very different from 4G, and make it, well, there we are, intervehicular vehicle to road communication for autonomous vehicles. Now, I don't know if any of you are listening to Jordan Peterson lately and some of the work he's been doing about AI, artificial intelligence, which is a big concern. And he made a statement in a video he did last week that Tesla automobiles are actually not cars anymore. They are computers on wheels. And I urge you to listen to Jordan and the last 3 or 4, 5 presentations he's done on AI, and they're on Rumble or BitChute. I don't know that YouTube allows him to do anything anymore, but this whole concept of artificial intelligence is part of the reason that they are doing these higher level technologies that have the speeds and the capabilities of bandwidth to allow, and I've actually ridden in a Tesla that was operating on autopilot in Kelowna about 3 years ago. It was an interesting experience because I wasn't driving, I was a passenger in the vehicle, but the vehicle was driving itself. There are lots of interesting concepts about that that ultimately we will probably experience to some degree. We now have flying cars and all kinds of other interesting technologies coming online with artificial intelligence, and the whole robot thing is pretty scary, quite honestly. The most terrifying part of the AI issue is what is called the singularity. And I know that Jordan Peterson talks about this. The singularity is when the AI intelligence becomes a single unit And there are numerous people, including Elon Musk, who some people have reservations about, including myself. And the singularity is when all of the AI brains get together and decide that we are expendable. If you have watched the Matrix movies, I personally don't believe the Matrix movies were anything other than future documentaries. That's a strange statement, but there are a lot of people that would agree with me on that. And this technology is part of that insanity that movie illustrates. And who knows, we may go there someday. I've watched the Matrix movie over 20 times now. I watch it about every 2 years. And the reason I do that is to keep my headspace up to speed on where we're going and where we may go and how I need, as a human being, to operate my life so that hopefully we don't end up there. So I urge you to do your own research on 5G, find out more about it, stay away from microcell towers, if at all possible. And this is an interesting apparatus that was just released a few weeks ago by Safe Living Technologies in Guelph, Ontario. And Robert Metzinger is the owner of that business. He's quite brilliant in the work he has done. I have a number of his meters, and this one's on my gotta get list for the near future. But they are a little pricey, but worth every penny. The Safe and Sound Pro millimeter wave meter measures up to 40 gigahertz, and that should cover most of the frequencies that 5G will be involved with in the near future. Right now, a lot of 5G is using 4G frequencies for various technologies, but things are going to be changing very dramatically in the near future with more and more technology being released. And I think this meter is going to be something a lot of people are going to want to invest in. Simply because they're going to want to know the levels that they're being exposed to. And Robert also has a number of really interesting meters, one that you can wear on your wrist with a warning level on it that will tell you when your exposure levels are something that you might not want to be exposed to. So slt.co is the website, and his products are absolutely top notch. He's absolutely brilliant, and there's a huge amount of information on there. Between his website and Magda's website, after spending a bit of time on there, actually it's a lot of time, but you can get thoroughly educated in this topic quite quickly. And I urge you to do that. I just wanted to show one more thing because I think I have 1 minute left. And this is my original cell phone. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, it worked on a handset, and it sat on my dashboard with a little antenna, and I thought I was pretty cool. So I hope this has given you enough information to get up to speed to some degree. I urge you to do your own research as much as possible. There is so much information that it takes years of work in this field to get really thoroughly educated. I started this work in around 1988. And maybe Magda will talk a little bit about our history. We met, I think it was the early 90s, I'm not sure when. She was a patient of mine in Peterborough, Ontario, and we've known each other ever since. So I'm going to turn this back to the leaders of this project and let Magda take over from here.
Ross, are you open for a few questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody who wants to ask a few questions? Lee, come on over here.
Hi, quick question about if you can mitigate radiation.
Okay. So this little device here, okay, is a very interesting technology that was developed in the early 1900s by Dr. George Lakhovsky, a Russian physicist, who developed the very first electromagnetic field therapy unit, utilizing his technology and also the technology of Nikola Tesla as well, who also developed his own pulsed electromagnetic therapy devices. The pattern of the geometrical design in this is the important component, although this one is actually made in Kelowna. For any of you who are living in BC, and she'll be swamped with people wanting these. And it's actually my design, but Holly at Shawanda on Ambrosie is the one that makes them, and they're incredibly high quality. And the price is ridiculous. They should be 10 times what she charges for them. And they actually offer some energetic protection. Doesn't mean you can use your smartphone up to the side of your head. And that's the problem with these gadgets that people sell, is that they say you can now use your smartphone and it's not going to hurt you. Yeah, give me a break. That's not the case in the vast majority of these devices. As one of the slides I presented earlier says, the way to protect yourself is with shielding or avoidance. Staying away from the source of radiation or using some sort of a shielding. And we'll talk about that just for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to turn things over to Dr. Havas. Some of the really crazy simple things you can do to protect yourself right now. Number one is turn off the circuit breaker to your bedroom at night. How do you do that? You plug in a reading lamp to the nearest outlet to your bed, and you turn off circuit breakers until you find the one that turns off the reading lamp. Now, that will reduce the electric field radiation in your sleeping space. Hopefully, you've already turned off your Wi-Fi router if you haven't eliminated Wi-Fi completely from your home by going Ethernet, which is not that difficult to do. But turning off the electrical power to your outlets is extremely beneficial. I've seen it change thousands of lives for the better in ways that are almost hard to imagine. And it's crazy simple. Now, the one tricky part is, I talked about that earlier, is if there is electrical wiring in the wall at the head of your bed for the room on the other side of the wall, you might have to kill that breaker as well, which is fairly common. And if it's on a wall adjoining somebody else's unit, you need to make friends with them and get them educated, or you need to do a shielding process using shielding paint. And the shielding paint is extremely valuable. I don't know how many thousands of gallons I've gone through in my time as an EMF consultant in Canada. But the shielding paint is called Y Shield. It's made in Germany. It's expensive and worth every penny. I personally tested some shielding devices for smart meters back in 2014, 2015. And they didn't work. People were paying $200 for these things out of the US, and they weren't working. So I developed my own process for shielding smart meters. Took about 3 months of trial and error, but we got it, we nailed it. Used the paint on the inside and the shielding material on the meter itself to deflect the radiation. And we got a 96% documented reduction of smart meter radiation in the home. With that procedure. And unfortunately, I only taught that to 2 people in Canada before I left. So it's probably really hard for you to find somebody that knows how to do that. But it can be done, and it's not that difficult. And I can, do a session on that sometime if anybody's interested. But the shielding paint is wonderful stuff, and I've used it in many, many situations in Kelowna and in Vancouver and in other Okanagan Valley cities where
Did you
people
get,
live.
why, did you get connected in on Zoom or?
No, we can't. We connect to one of these Wi-Fi's, but it does not let us connect at all.
Can put the room guy in your room now if you want.
It's not ready.
Oh, get your room ready and.
I see something in the background there in Jeanette's place called a microwave oven. Is that a microwave? Yeah, I believe that's a
Yeah.
microwave.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the second most dangerous thing in your house.
Oh.
I have measured hundreds of them. There's a grid on the door that is supposed to stop the radiation from coming out. Guess what? It doesn't work.
Oh.
I've measured hundreds of microwave ovens, and the amount of radiation coming through that grid is horrific. And I consider it to be literally life-threatening at a level that is almost hard to imagine. The microwave oven should be unplugged, and it's really good for a couple of things: for defrosting food without the microwave energy, and it's a great bread box. That's all a microwave oven is really good for.
The magnet.
And yeah, they also contain, there are 2 magnets in every microwave. And the magnets are incredible healing magnets. I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of them over the last few years. And I now can take the magnets out of a microwave oven in 3 minutes with a screw gun and a couple of pairs of wire cutters and a little pry bar. And the magnets are incredible. And unfortunately, there are millions of these amazing magnets going into landfills. It's really a tragedy. So, you know, getting the power off in your bedroom at night, really simple. Getting rid of your Wi-Fi, not that difficult. You can hardwire your home for Ethernet with what's called the power line system, which is available at Best Buy, and it's available at Staples and London Drugs and any electronics store. It's inexpensive. It works incredibly well. I installed hundreds of systems in Canada with only one that didn't work because the house was 10,000 square feet, and it was just too long a distance from the router to the far reaches of the house. But other than that, they were flawless. And the power line system works incredibly well, and you get rid of your Wi-Fi, which is the 3rd most dangerous thing in your house. So these are real simple things everybody can do and everybody should do to reduce your levels of electromagnetic radiation exposure. If you're living near power lines, sell your house immediately and move somewhere where you are not near power lines. If you're living near a cell tower, you might want to do that as well. The problem with that is an ethical situation. Who do you sell your house to? Somebody you hate and want dead? You know, and yeah, that's a whole other topic. That one's crazy. You know, it's like my patients when I told them they needed to get rid of their microwave oven, and they would say, well, what do I do with it? And I said, well, you have to throw it away. You can't sell it. You know, it's dangerous. You can't sell it. You can't give it away. You have to throw it away. That you know, and it's a $250 microwave oven. So so
Okay,
anyway, those are the issues. Those are some simple things you can do. There are more. All of this information is available on the internet. I urge you to get on magdahavas.com. It's a mind-blowing encyclopedia of information that she has put together with some very, very skilled web design people. And you can spend a couple of weeks and not read it all, but you'll learn a lot. So I'm going to finish up now. I've talked over my time period, and we're going to let Magda take over.
Set down plug on microwave.
Suzanne, would you like me to start? And if you would, you have to allow me to share my screen. Or Derek. Have we lost Suzanne again, Derek?
I don't see Suzanne on here, so,
She was on a minute ago.
okay, Bettina was, yeah, okay, Bettina was back on and she just, okay, let's give her a minute. I'm just going to stop recording for.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to present today. I'm going to be discussing the 5G experiment. And as a university professor, my primary research involved any kind of environmental pollutant. I started with chemicals and then moved on to electromagnetic pollution. And I really love learning and teaching. So it was a perfect job opportunity for me. And I'd like to start off fairly quickly about what we know. Ross covered some of this, and I'll try not to repeat very much of what he said, although we didn't really get together ahead of time to determine what we were each going to talk about. Basically, electromagnetic radiation is a form of pollution. We call chemical pollution smog, and electromagnetic pollution can be called electrosmog. We have examples from stationary sources. Ours are equally as bad. We have radiation inside our homes that we might generate ourselves or come in from neighbors. We have our behavior that can expose us to radiation. And there's increasing number of wearables that will also increase our exposure. It's generated by wireless technology and electronic devices. This is electromagnetic radiation. And anything that's labeled smart relates to two-way communication. And that includes a lot of the devices that we currently use. There are a number of health effects, and they fall into basically three categories: cancers that Ross mentioned with his own experience. We have impaired reproduction that's been well documented, and we have mostly neurological disorders, but they also affect other systems in the body, from the cardiovascular system and the immune system. And collectively, we call these symptoms electrohypersensitivity. And if we look at cancers, impaired reproduction, and electrohypersensitivity, the current name for them is electromagnetic illness, or EMI. Now, we have evidence that dates back to the mid-1900s. This is a very important publication by a guy called Zori Glaser. We set up a website called www.zoriglaser.com. And if you go to this website, you have access to a whole history of microwave radiation from Dr. Zori's archives. And back in 1970, there was one paper that he published. It was actually in 71, and he updated it in 72, where he cites more than 2,000 references. And these are the different health effects that he's been documenting way back in the 1970s. More recently, Americans for Responsible Technology have indicated a number of references that are showing impaired reproduction, a total of 68, cancers 45, and nervous system or electrohypersensitivity 49. And there are a lot of other illnesses as well, and it affects wildlife as well as plants. Now, we also know the mechanisms involved, and the human body is very complex. So to say that there's only one mechanism is absolutely ludicrous. The one that has received the most attention is oxidative stress, which can affect many of the organs in the body, and it can contribute to cancer. But there's all of these different types of biophysiological changes that have happened that have been documented in the literature. When it comes to electrosmog, and Ross alluded to this, there are actually 4 categories, but I'm going to refer to them as 3 categories here. We have extremely low frequency electric and magnetic fields. This comes from our use of electricity. We have intermediate frequencies that have been popularized as dirty electricity, and this comes from electronic devices, and the frequencies are in the thousands of cycles per second range. And then we have radio frequency and microwave radiation. And here we're really dealing with wireless technology, and this is what I'm going to focus on in this talk today. We're having a love affair with wireless, and it really started a long time ago. The first wireless was radio, and that was after Tesla and Marconi did some broadcasts over the ocean. Television came in the 1950s, cell phones in the 1990s, roughly, although they were available earlier, very few people had them. We have Wi-Fi that came in around 2000s, and this was imposed by the educational system. Parents didn't have any say in the matter, and in most cases, they weren't even informed. Smart meters became more popular in 2010, and that includes smart appliances as well that communicate with each other. And 5G was scheduled for 2020, and this was telecom imposed. So when it comes to 5G, why should we be concerned about it? Well, it's going to mean more radiation, and the current levels are harmful. So it's just going to be more harm. And we have no choice in the matter. We're unable to change the Wi-Fi in schools. We're unable to get smart meters wired. And certainly it's very difficult to stop 5G, even though scientists are trying that. Now, there's a big difference between radio and television versus some of these other sources of electromagnetic radiation. And the basic difference is that our radio and our TV are just receivers. They're not smart. They can't communicate with the radio station, where the rest of these technologies both receive and transmit information. And when they're transmitting is when they're sending out that pulse, and that's when you're going to have some of the highest exposure, not when it's receiving, but rather when it's sending. And I'll talk more about this in a few minutes. When it comes to radio frequency guidelines, the most recent ones haven't changed very much from the 1996, which is when they were established both internationally and nationally in Canada and the United States. And if we look at cell phone subscriptions, from 1995 to 2015, we've had less than 10% use in Canada, so less than 10%.
Could you share your screen, please?
I am? No? Was I not sharing?
We're not currently seeing it.
Okay, let's try this again then. And that's true for everything? Like you haven't seen any of it? How's that?
Okay, now we're seeing it. No, we haven't been seeing your slides. We're just watching you. So your screen is showing up now. That's great. Thank you.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So since 1995 to 2015, the number of subscriptions has increased from less than 10% for cell phone users in Canada to 82%. And as I mentioned, the guidelines that are currently still in effect were established at the very early part of the cell phone increase in Canada. And cell phones come with cell phone antennas, so the more cell phones there are, the more cell phone antennas there are as well. When it comes to Wi-Fi, in 2005, this is a global map of different Wi-Fi hotspots, and you can get this information from wiggle.net, and I think there's only one G in Wiggle. I think that's a mistake there. And this is what it looked like 15 years later. So there's been a huge spread of Wi-Fi from 2005 to 2015. And remember, the guidelines came in 1996, so they haven't been influenced by any of this build out. Now, I mentioned cancers are one of the key things that have been documented. They include brain tumors, the gliomas, and meningiomas are the two dominant types. The glioma is the one that's been mentioned most frequently in the literature. We have something called acoustic neuroma, which is a nerve in the ear canal. We have salivary gland tumors and we have breast cancer. We also have a few other types of tumors that are showing up, and they include testicular cancer, thyroid cancer in women is increasing dramatically, and we think it might be due to cell phone radiation, and colorectal cancer in men seems to be increasing. And that might be due to the fact that some men keep their cell phones in their back pocket, and that would be very close to their rectum and colon and testicles. In 2011, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified radiofrequency radiation as a possible human carcinogen. And the reason they said possible is because at that stage, there was only one large multi-million-dollar, multi-year study that was conducted by the US Air Force, and that was published in 1992. It tested Wi-Fi frequencies, which is 2,450 megahertz or 2.45 gigahertz. And what this study showed is that there was a 100% increase in metastatic tumors and a 260% increase in primary tumors in rats. And since this was the only study, IARC didn't feel comfortable classifying it, classifying radiofrequency beyond a possible human carcinogen. So it was based largely on just one large-scale study, plus a number of epidemiological studies and in vitro studies. In 2018, two reports came out, and you can see they're testing different frequencies. This is at 900 megahertz for the National Toxicology Program and 1800 megahertz for the Ramazzini Institute. And basically, the National Toxicology Program was testing the effectiveness of cell phones in inducing changes in rats. And the Ramazzini Institute was looking primarily at cell phone antennas. And so they were using lower levels of exposure. And based on that, both of them are showing an increase in gliomas and heart schwannomas. And so scientists are recommending that it should be, radiofrequency radiation should be classified as a probable human carcinogen or as a human carcinogen, which would be a class 1 classification. The International Classification of Diseases, ICD-10, also has a code for radiofrequency radiation injury, and it's W90.0. So doctors who have patients who are harmed by electromagnetic radiation now have a code that they can refer to in their medical diagnoses. Now, it's really important not to keep your cell phone anywhere near your body. And that's also true for Wi-Fi. Your laptop in Wi-Fi mode should not be held on your lap. Women are born with all of their eggs, and if so, their eggs become damaged, they're going to have difficulty giving birth to healthy young people. And this could actually have an effect on the next generation as well. Men produce new sperm every 3 months. And so my recommendation is if you're in a partnership and you're hoping to have children, that men should refrain from exposure to cell phones or any kind of wireless radiation for at least 3 months prior to the fertilization to ensure that their sperm are healthier as a result. And so we know that effects on sperm lead to infertility. And I'm going to just share with you one study. Now, Ross said that you should keep your cell phone away from your head, and this is based on the inverse square law. So every step that you take, it's 1 over r squared, which is the distance from the point source. And so if you're 2 centimeters away, it's going to be 1/4 the level of radiation. And if you're 4, units away, then it's going to be 1/116. So the further away you are, the better. And in cell phone magazines, the users are, they're actually recommending that you keep a cell phone away from your body, and ideally between 1.5 and 2.5 inches. When it comes to the Federal Communication Commission, Bulletin 65, they're recommending that an iPad should be kept at least 20 centimeters or 8 inches away from your body if you're in Wi-Fi mode. Now, what is the evidence that we have for reproduction? Well, according to the Americans for Responsible Technology, there's more than 71 studies on reproduction. Most of them are dealing with male fertility issues, and that includes damage to sperm. Some of them deal with fetal and newborn development, and some of them are dealing with children, usually under the age of 10, when they're beginning to develop things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this is just one study. And in this study, it shows men who don't have a cell phone, and this was published in 2006. Those who used a cell phone for less than 2 hours a day, 2 to 4 hours a day, and greater than 4 hours a day. And this is showing you sperm count. So men who didn't use a cell phone had much more sperm per fluid compared to those who used cell phones. And so there's a decrease here. The motility of the sperm is also reduced. Some of them are simply not surviving. They're unable to do their job because they're actually dead. And many of them are deformed. So here we're looking at, even in the control population, only 40% of the sperm had a normal shape, which is very disturbing. And that drops to 18% by the time a man uses a cell phone for more than 4 hours a day. Now, electrohypersensitivity, I mentioned, has been classified as a neurological injury. It goes beyond that. But Dr. Henry Lai looked at the literature between 2007 and 2020. He found 335 studies, and 3/4 of them showed an effect of radiofrequency radiation on the nervous system, and only 1/4 showed no significant effect. Now, EHS can be disabling, and it's an environmentally triggered disability. And here, this is something I published in 2019. Electrohypersensitivity is an environmentally induced disability that requires immediate attention. And in this publication, I look at various neurological effects, some of which are more common in the elderly and some of which are more common in young people. But a lot of these are simply increasing in the population, and they've been associated with cell phone use or exposure to other forms of wireless technology. Now, we have quite a bit of evidence for electrohypersensitivity. We know that it affects the heart. And so we've done studies with that. This is an ECG showing different parts of a normal heart rhythm. And the interval, the peak to peak interval, this is the R to R interval, is something that many heart rate variability technologies measure. And this is just one example from our study. This is a person who is highly reactive. This is a sham exposure, and this is showing their heart rate, 65 beats per minute when they weren't exposed to the radiation. When they were exposed to the base station of a cordless phone, you can see how their heart becomes irregular, and it's up to 86 beats per minute now, rather than 65. Here's a sham exposure, and here's a microwave exposure again. And so it's something that's repeatable. It's something for some people that only happens when they're exposed to this radiation. And someone having this, suddenly their heart starts beating, and very often it'll go much higher than 86 beats per minute. And these people are feeling as though they're having an anxiety attack. That's what they equate it to. Does radiofrequency radiation affect the blood? Yes, and we've published on this as well. This is showing live blood, and this is actually my blood. So I'm electrohypersensitive based on this particular metric. And this is my blood under dark field before I exposed myself to Wi-Fi. And here I simply exposed myself to Wi-Fi for 10 minutes. And you can see my blood cells are sticking together. And when this happens, it's going to be harder for the body to get enough oxygen and to get rid of waste products if the cells are sticking together. And the symptoms that you might experience should you have this rouleau formation include headaches, fatigue, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, and you can see them here. The most serious are heart attacks and strokes. And so this is not something that should be taken lightly. Does radiofrequency radiation affect blood sugar? And we've published on that as well. The answer to that is yes. And here we have an example of a woman in New York who was a type 2 diabetic. And what we see on the y-axis is her plasma glucose levels. In gray, these are just 3 different days. In gray is what her blood sugar was before she went for a 20-minute walk, and the green is what it was after a 20-minute walk. And you can see here on 3 different days, it really doesn't matter how high her blood sugar was starting. After 20 minutes, her body's consumed enough of the sugar that the levels go down. However, when she works out on a treadmill, the levels actually go up. And so the blue is after a treadmill. And instead of going down, it's going up. And I think this could be a very useful diagnostic for cardiologists to use with their patients. Now, this is a study that was published in 2003, and it's showing people who live at different distances from a cell tower. These are the symptoms that they experience, and they're simply listed here in decreasing order. This is how far away they are from a transmitter, a radio frequency transmitter. And those in red are within 10 meters all the way out to beyond 300 meters for those in black. And along this axis, we have the percentage of people experiencing symptoms very often. And you can see here that for the very first symptom, fatigue, 70% of the people who live within 10 meters or 30 feet of a cell tower are experiencing fatigue very often, whereas that drops to 25% for those who are far enough away from this radiation. And you'll note here, 2003 was pre a lot of the Wi-Fi rollout and smart meter rollout. So it was the major source of radiation coming from outside your home was actually going to be coming from cell towers and your neighbors. Now, these are common symptoms of electrohypersensitivity. The ones in red are something that we experience as we age. And so I prefer to call this rapid aging syndrome, rather than electrohypersensitivity, because it's more descriptive as to what's actually happening in your body. And it's not aging on the outside, but rather aging on the inside. Aging starts at the cellular level, and it starts with oxidative stress to your cells or rusting of your cells. Now, some people may ask, well, how many people live within 10 meters of a cell tower? And the answer to that is quite a few, and this is increasing. And once the 5G comes out, it's going to increase even more. So what percent of the population have electrohypersensitivity? And I've just done some calculations for Canada, Mexico, and the United States. We think, or I think, that up to 3% of the population could have severe sensitivity. And that accounts for, in Canada, 1.2 million people, in Mexico, 3.8, and in the United States, 10 million people. I then think that another 35% have mild to moderate symptoms. But if you fall into the severe category, it's quite likely that you are disabled to a certain degree. Some of these people are unable to work. They're unable to visit hospitals. Some of them are homeless, and several of them have actually considered MAID, which is medical assistance in dying, and that has been approved here in Canada. So what do we know about 5G? Well, when it comes to 5G infrastructure, it consists of satellites, macro cell sites, small cells near your home, and fiber optics. Fiber optics are relatively safe. There's no radiation coming from them. Satellites, the radiation coming from satellites is actually quite low. And certainly my colleagues who specialize in this tell me that this is not something we need to be concerned about at this stage. And I partially believe them. Macro cell sites are dangerous. If you're near them, they're very powerful. But the most dangerous is if you live near a small cell antenna that's going to be irradiating the neighborhood with various frequencies. Now, 5G uses 3 different frequency bands. There's a low band, which is called is sub 1 gigahertz, and both 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G all use frequencies that are less than 1 gigahertz. Then there's a mid band that's between 1 and 7 gigahertz, and once again, all of these use that as well. And then there's the high band, which is called millimeter waves. And here we're talking about roughly between 24 gigahertz and 52 gigahertz, depending on the location. And that's restricted to 5G only. So the major difference between 5G and the lower generations is that we now have millimeter waves as well as all the other frequencies. And so frequency is increasing with generations, and the penetrating power of the radiation is actually decreasing. So 5G will not replace 4G. It will be in addition to all other frequencies, and it requires densification of small cells. And here small cells are going to be placed roughly 100 meters apart or 300 yards apart. And this is going to result in more exposure to microwave radiation simply because we're closer to it, and the levels of radiation being emitted are actually higher as well. Now, there's a few other differences. There's massive multiple input, multiple output, or massive MIMO. And here, what this refers to is there are multiple antennas regularly transmitting information. And then there's something called beamforming. 4G is more like a flashlight or a floodlight when it comes to radiation. And 5G is going to direct that radiation to the users. So it's going to be more like a spotlight rather than a floodlight. And when you have both of these, you have obviously a combination, and once again, higher levels of exposure. Now, 2020 was the year that 5G, they were planning on beginning the rollout, and that's when it started in the United States and in a few other countries. Some countries had it slightly earlier. And there's going to be winners and losers. A lot of people are going to make a lot of money, and that's what the driving force is for this. Unfortunately, it's going to result in a lot of radiation. So 50 trillion gigabytes of data is basically a measure of how much exposure we're going to have. And so there are going to be losers, and here are some of the losers. This is a report that was done by Dr. Leonard Hardell and Mona Nielsen. They've done 3 reports like this. I'd like to just share one with you. This was published earlier this year in 2023. And here we have a home, an apartment building, where they replaced the 4G antenna above these 2 windows here with a 5G antenna. And this is where the people that are being tested lived. They lived immediately beneath this antenna. And some of the radiation is being transmitted out away from the antenna, and some of the radiation is going up and down because of side lobes when it comes to antennas and how they function. And so here we have exposures. The exposure in their apartment when they still had 3G and 4G antennas was 9,000 microwatts per meter squared. Once the 5G antennas were installed, levels of radiation went up and up and up. The family, the husband and wife became so ill, they moved away. They went and spent time in their office space, which had lower levels of radiation than even in their apartment. And eventually they moved to a house in the country where the levels of radiation were even lower. Now this value, 2.5 million microwatts per meter squared, actually topped the meter we were using. And Health Canada enables, their guidelines allow for 4.4 million cycles or microwatts per meter squared. Averaged over a 6-minute period. So Health Canada will say if it's as high as this, averaged over a 6-minute period, it's perfectly safe. But that isn't the case here. So here we have information from the previous site, the place and date, the exposure, and here in blue we have symptoms. The light blue are the number of symptoms, and the dark blue refers to symptom intensity. And here's the list of the symptoms that were documented. And this is showing the degree of symptoms as well. So black is the worst, red is considerable, amber is moderate, and green is mild. So you can see here for the husband and for the wife. And so when 5G was introduced, for both of them, their symptoms, the number of symptoms, and especially symptom severity increased dramatically. Now, as part of the research that I've been doing, I've started a group called the Global EMF Network. And we started this back in 2020, which was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And fortunately, we found that Verizon had a map that was available to anyone where they were basically bragging about the rollout of 5G. And when it comes to 5G millimeter waves, they call that 5G ultra wideband. So this red circle refers to millimeter waves. 5G nationwide includes everything except the millimeter waves. And then we have 4G and 3G. And so you can zoom in on this map, and we did that for New York. And you can see here 2 avenues, 5th and 6th Avenue. 5th Avenue has millimeter wave antennas installed, and 6th Avenue doesn't. And so I contacted some of the members in New York and asked them if they would measure these 2 streets for us as part of the Global EMF Network, which is what they did. And you can see the results here for Manhattan. And this is for 55th Street and 59th Street. So these are 2 different exposures. And you can see here that we have average, median, and maximum. And you can see here that the levels once 5G comes in is much higher than it was before 5G, which is shown in the blue. And here we have Brooklyn as well, and the same thing. So when it comes to the median level is that this value here, the 2022, this is the half of the readings are below this value and half of them are above this value to the maximum. And this is showing you the Russian guidelines. So you can see here that if you're in Brooklyn and you're walking along the street that has the small cells with microwave radiation and millimeter wave radiation, your exposure is going to be much higher than the Russian guideline most of the time. So this is very important information that is making basically a lot of people losers. Now, when it comes to the key concerns, although I'm primarily concerned about human health, and that's what I do research in, there's a lot of other issues that I think we need to consider. And these are showing more losers in the game. And I'd like to share with you what's happening primarily in China, because they're the leaders in this particular area. China is actually using artificial intelligence in the classroom. And you can see these children have bands around their head. This is measuring their brainwave activity. And there are different lights. So when the light is red, it shows that they're deeply focused. If the light is green, it shows that they're focused. If it's blue, they're distracted. And if it's white, it means they're offline. So this is actually measuring brainwave activity and sending information to the teacher's iPad. And she will then send that information to the parents saying, you know, Johnny was not focusing today in class. You might want to talk to him. So this is really interfering with privacy. But worse than that, I think it's increasing microwave exposure in the classroom. We also have facial recognition in China that's quite advanced. You can do purchases using facial recognition, and police have special glasses that will allow them to identify people. And they can be blacklisted people, they can be very important people, or they can be an average citizen. So once again, our ability to maintain privacy is interfered with this type of technology. And these are the different countries that allow facial recognition. And you can see here in green, we have Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So all of these countries in green really is, these are the losers when it comes to privacy. Now, currently we're using millimeter waves at airports. This is a normal metal detector, and this fancier gadget uses millimeter waves to scan people. But the amount of time a traveler is in one of these units is probably under a minute. And the problem here is that employees are asked to calibrate these scanners on a daily basis. And I was at the airport and I was talking to them because I refused to go through this millimeter wave scanner. And I was talking to them, telling them why. And one of the ladies told me that they have to test them, and they do it as many as 20 times a day, and they're becoming sick. But the airport facilities who are responsible for security have simply ignored the fact that these people are becoming sick. There's another example of where millimeter waves are used, and this is with the active denial system. And I'll just play you a short little video, and I hope you can hear this as well. Whoops. I guess it didn't play. Nope. Okay. Well, basically, what that video showed is that you can have these large tanks that have a parabolic antenna on top of them, and they could aim a beam at a crowd that uses 95 gigahertz, so that's a millimeter wave, and it causes excessive heating in the body. And for that particular reason, it's very effective in crowd control without causing death or damage to the body. The major concern I have about these active denial systems is that the eyes are very sensitive, and that small amount of burst of very intense radiation is likely to ultimately lead to cataracts. So anyone who's testing this without wearing protective eyewear is actually endangering their eyes at the same time. Now, one of the things I was asked to talk about was whether or not there was a connection between 5G and COVID-19. And during the shutdown or the lockdown, whatever you want to call it, I was spending a lot of time online trying to figure out what was going on globally. I found it intriguing. And I started doing some assessments. And the real question I asked was, why are the levels of COVID so different in different countries? Why are the death rates so high in some countries and very low in others? And the overall conclusion that I came up with is that if there's no millimeter wave exposure, the cases, the number of cases and the number of deaths per million would be much lower in the United States with and without millimeter waves. So it would be 18 to 30% lower for 5G millimeter states and 39 to 59% lower for millimeter counties. And I'm going to share that information with you. And so here is a map of the world showing the global cumulative cases as of September 18th, 2020. And this is showing you the bottom figure here, showing you the global 5G deployment as of September 2020. And you can see there's some similarities. So the levels are high in the United States. The levels are high in Europe and low in Africa. So this seems to be showing there's a relationship between the two. And then we have India, which showing you a fairly high cumulative case rate as of September 2020, and but no 5G. So in some places, there's a good correlation between the two, and other places there isn't. If we look at the top 10 countries in Europe that have populations over 2 million, here are the ones that have 5G, and these are the ones that don't have 5G. And if we now take the averages for these countries, we'll see that the 5G European countries have a much higher number of deaths per million than those that don't have 5G. And this is actually attributing 60% increase excess deaths in countries with 5G. And that is statistically significant at the 5% level. And here are the data that we have. This is data for the United States, and it's looking at it by state. So here we have the states that don't have 5G millimeter waves yet. And the average number of cases per million was 3,220. Here we have the states with millimeter waves. And if we subtract the 3,000 from the 5,000, we end up with an excess number of cases per million of 2,556. And that's an 80% increase that's statistically significant at the 99% level. And here we have the same information for deaths. And once again, there's 149 excess deaths per million with states that had 5G millimeter wave technology. And this is almost a doubling of the death rate. We also looked at it per county. And here we have 5G or without 5G, with 5G, once again, 3,000 excess cases per million and an 85% increase that's significant statistically. And here are the deaths. And once again, excess deaths, and that's 142% increase, also statistically significant. And we did this for 3 different dates and they all came out the same. So there is a relationship between COVID-19 cases and deaths and exposure to microwave radiation. Now, what's really intriguing is that a lot of the symptoms common to COVID are also common to electrohypersensitivity. And these are the symptoms that both of these illnesses have. And this is just showing the ones that are more prevalent when it comes to radio frequency radiation. But someone who's suffering from dizziness, headaches, difficulty concentrating, in the past, that might be attributed to radio frequency radiation. But in today's climate, that's probably more likely to be attributed to COVID or long COVID. But because the symptoms overlap between these, it's really difficult to know whether people are becoming more sensitized to the radiation after developing COVID, or if the radiation is simply minimizing their immune system, impairing their immune system, so they're more likely to develop COVID. When it comes to guidelines, they vary globally by quite a bit. These are the guidelines in various countries in microwaves per meter squared. And you can see here the lowest guideline, this is for a sleeping area in Germany, is actually higher than the amount of radiation a cell phone needs to operate. So you can see here how much radiation a cell phone needs to operate. And yet in United States and Canada and parts of Europe, they're allowing very, very high levels of radiation, even though we don't require it for cell phone radiation. Now, some of the guidelines are based on a thermal or heating effect. This is the least protective, and they're averaged over a 6 to 30 minute period. These are short-term acute guidelines. And then we have some precautionary long-term guidelines that are established by biologists and doctors rather than physicists and engineers who know very little in most cases about biology. And so Health Canada would say that the people living in that Swedish apartment building shouldn't have any problems, yet you could see how many symptoms they had, and they were simply becoming sicker and sicker the more they were exposed to the radiation. Now, why do we have millimeter waves? And that's primarily to support the Internet of Things. And right now, we don't know what all the Internet of Things are going to look like in the future. We know there's going to be driverless cars, smart homes, we already have them, smart cities, surgery that can be done at a distance. And all of this, unfortunately, is going to increase our exposure and make more and more people sick. The real reason for 5G, what we're told is that we will be able to download videos much more quickly. Anyone who believes that this is the reason for 5G is totally naive. It has nothing to do with speed for downloading videos. They're fast enough now. The real reason for 5G is for facial recognition and for surveillance. And this is already prevalent in China. And while we were locked down here in Canada, the cell phone providers were putting up millimeter wave antennas everywhere. They're not activated yet because there hasn't been an auction, but basically they were setting up cameras for facial recognition. And so really our ability to maintain our freedom and independence is severely impaired. So what can you do in order to protect yourself? Well, the cell phone user's manual say keep the cell phone at least 2.5 centimeters away from your body. For iPads, it's 20 centimeters. And Ross mentioned that microwave ovens leak. I found exactly the same thing. This is my microwave oven at home. Yes, I do have one. And yes, I do use it occasionally, but I remove myself from the room. So I'm not being irradiated when I use my microwave oven. I measured this at the door with the oven off. The levels in my home are very, very low, 4.4 microwatts per meter squared. At the door, when I turn the microwave oven on high to heat a glass of water, the levels top the meter at 2.5 million microwatts per meter squared, and 1 meter away with the microwave oven on, that dropped to 335,000. So these are very, very high levels. And if you want to know if your microwave oven leaks and you have cell phone reception in your kitchen, simply take your cell phone, put it in the microwave oven, close the door. Do not turn the microwave oven on. This is really critical, or you'll wreck your cell phone, and simply phone it from another phone. And if the cell phone in the microwave oven rings, then that radiation penetrated. And so if it goes in, it will come out as well. Your eyes are very sensitive to microwave radiation. Distances should be much more than 5 meters. Ideally should be in a different room. And the good news is that these exposures are usually less than a minute when you're heating things. Other things that you can do, obviously make sure that your phone is mostly in airplane mode, but turn off your other wireless, other antennas as well. And that includes Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and your personal hotspot. Texting is somewhat safer than putting a cell phone to your head. However, as soon as you press that, send the text, that's when you're going to get that burst of radiation. Important to keep your cell phone away from your body. Ideally, the cell phone should be in airplane mode with both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off. You don't want to be periodically exposed to that radiation. Speaker mode is a good way of using it. And since the antennas, the speakers are at the bottom of your cell phone, by putting it into a dish, this will actually amplify the sound. And this is what I recommend, that this is how you use your cell phone. Simply put it into a bowl, and that will take that sound radiation and amplify it without you being exposed. Now, this is a study that came out earlier this year. And it has some very fascinating information. And what it's showing you here is that someone who holds a cell phone immediately right to their head, 66% of that radiation is absorbed by the hand, 28% is absorbed by the head, and only 6% is used to radiate the cell phone. If you move it 2 inches, 2 centimeters away, less is absorbed by the head, more is absorbed by the hand. And if it's at 6 centimeters, you can see a very small percentage is absorbed by the head. And this is the amount that it's absorbed by the body based on how far away you have your cell phone. So if you don't want your hand to absorb it, and most of us shouldn't want that either, it could probably result in something like arthritis later on in life. So ideally putting it into a bowl or putting it onto a desk is the way to use your cell phone. Now, if it's stationary, it's important that we wire it. So we can wire smart meters, we can wire smart appliances, printers, mice, keyboards can all be wired. They don't need to be wireless. Same for your home phone. And we can, use Ethernet cables, fiber optics, or power line adapters. So all of these are useful ways to minimize your exposure to radio frequency radiation. Use wired instead of wireless whenever possible. Now, the other important thing is that there are more and more technologies available. So you can even take your iPhone and keeping it on airplane mode, you can connect to the internet through Ethernet cables. And if you'd like to know how to do this, if you go to the electrosensitiveSociety.com, they have specific information on what kind of technology you need, how to set it up. And so this is what I would recommend. This is a very important book, Reinventing Wires, written by Timothy Shekel. And basically what he's saying is we need to wire everything. Let's put things back on the wire and it'll be a lot safer. If it's stationary, it should be wired. Now, sometimes when I give talks, someone will come up to me and say, you know, if that were true, they would have told us. And I really enjoy this because they are telling us. So here we have a number of examples. I mentioned the Zori Glaser document that was published in the 1970s. In 2015, there was the International EMF Scientist Appeal, where 248 scientists who do research in this area, so these are experts in this area, from 42 countries signed this particular appeal. Cell phone companies are now asked to put advisories in their user guides to keep it away from the body. Medical academies are stating that smart meters should be wired and it's safer to minimize your exposure to wireless technology. Lloyd's of London and other insurance agencies have stopped insuring against radio frequency health effects. So if you're a cell phone company and you're sued for brain tumor, then the insurance company will not protect you against that lawsuit. You will have to pay yourself. And recently, governments in different parts of the world are banning Wi-Fi in schools. They're removing them. Public utilities are actually allowing people to opt out of smart meters, and that's an example in Iowa a few years ago. Recently, the courts are accommodating people with electro-hypersensitivity, and there are several cases in Italy where the courts have claimed that the tumors people have been complaining about were caused by cell phones. And then more recently, there's the scientists and medical doctors, an appeal. They're demanding a moratorium on 5G. And so they are telling us, but we are not listening. Now, when it comes to response to health effects, human environmental health effects, there are a number of different organizations. And you can see here I've got no change in sight, and that's true for government, industry, and unfortunately, mass media. So when it comes to governments, municipal and provincial governments are usually unaware of this, what the health effects of wireless technology, since the federal government is normally responsible for establishing guidelines for a particular country. Guidelines in many countries are poor and there's no random monitoring or enforcement. So no one's measuring it. There's no traffic cops out there identifying who's over the line. When it comes to industry, they're denying there's a problem because they don't want legal action. However, there's some really good technical solutions available. There's shielding and blocking that's available. And ability to measure this is actually becoming more affordable with less expensive meters. However, for both of these, there's really no change in sight. When it comes to mainstream media, they're normally unaware of this. They deny there's a problem, and they're basically not covering it in the media. And that's because a lot of these newspapers are owned by the telecom industry, and they're supported financially through advertising. So these three very powerful organizations, there's no change in sight. When it comes to education, the health effects of electromagnetic radiation are not taught in schools. Schools are denying Wi-Fi is a problem because, once again, they don't want to be sued. Most of the information is coming from physicists and engineers rather than biologists and medical doctors denying there's a problem. And that some of the research is actually funded by the telecom industry, and there's a huge amount of bias involved. However, there is some innovative research, so the change is coming, but it's coming very slowly. And the same applies to the medical profession. This isn't taught in medical school. There's pressure on the healthcare system. Doctors can't help their patients heal because they're returning to a toxic environment in their homes. But once again, this is changing slowly. Legally, there's more and more legal challenges, and this is increasing awareness as well. And then finally, there's some misrepresentation with the social media, but there's also some good information, and this is giving us some hope. And so having Zoom meetings like this is actually increasing awareness. So what does the future hold for something like this? Well, I like to use this sort of analogy that if you're, this is the level of pollution, and if you happen to be under this particular line for radio frequency, you're probably not going to survive all that well. If we do nothing, levels are going to increase, and more people are going to be adversely affected. And I don't know, what percentage is going to be okay after the increase in exposure. We can do something, ideally something bigger than sticking your finger in the dam, because that's not going to really slow it down very much. We need safe sites, which is represented here by Noah's Ark. We can actually reduce the levels of exposure, especially if we limit it only to mobile devices. So if the only thing that required wireless radiation was things like a cell phone, our levels of radiation would decrease quite substantially in our home environment. So a society that doesn't take care of its children doesn't have a future. And in my mind, the future consists of anxiety-prone children who are taking care of their neurologically damaged parents. And I apologize, this is a very negative sense of what's going to happen. But this is going to happen unless we stop this insanity. And if not us, who? If not now, when? Here are some websites that have useful information, including some that sell products. And I'd like to draw your attention to the Electrosensitive Society that has information for doctors on how to minimize your exposure, as well as for people who are suffering with electro-hypersensitivity. And I'd like to thank you very much for giving me the time.
Wow, that was amazing. Well, thank you so much, Magda. Can you hear me?
I can.
Wonderful. Yeah, to introduce myself. Yep, there you go. This is your address. What an information, hey, everybody. That was incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anybody, are you open for just a quick Q&A for a few questions? Is there anybody? Okay. Is there anybody? Yeah, okay. So here's someone is coming up here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for this. My mom has really bad sensitivities, and I know we talked a lot about Wi-Fi. How is, it might sound silly, but how is data on your phone? Is that the exact same thing?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Could you speak into the microphone?
Yeah, I was just saying, is data on your phone the same as Wi-Fi? It might be really silly, but we talked a lot about Wi-Fi.
So, yes.
Oh, in here. Can you hear me better here?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. I was talking in the mic and it didn't work. So my question was, we talked a lot about Wi-Fi, and would that be the same as using data on your phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly the same. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, I just was like, okay, Wi-Fi data, similar thing. And I love that you shared things that we can do at home, because it's really important for everybody. And you know, the flights and all that, I always get patted down as well. And I always make a joke of it. Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just would like to know if you can say anything about the exposure to radiation on landline, wireless, like cordless phones compared to cell phones.
Okay, yeah. Well, one of the things Ross mentioned, and I agree entirely with him, he said one of the worst things you can have in your house is a cordless phone. And he's right. Now, the cordless phones we have in North America the base station for the phone, and then you have, some satellite phones. Basically, it could be 1 or 2 satellite phones. That base station is constantly radiating microwaves. And it's sending it out 300 meters so that you could walk down the street in your neighborhood with your cordless phone and still continue a conversation. That's how powerful these are. They have cordless phones in Europe that are activated once a person picks up the phone and is ready to talk. And that's also true for baby monitors, wireless baby monitors. So people who have baby monitors here in North America, those baby monitors are very similar to our cordless phones. They're radiating constantly, which means they're irradiating the infant, when it's close to their crib. And they're radiating the parent that has that cell phone on a hip pocket or whatever. So one of the things we were trying to do is bring those devices from Europe that are sound activated. So with the baby monitors, in Europe, there's no radiation. The baby cries, the monitor turns on, sends the message to the parent's monitor, and then the parent comes in and checks on the baby and everything turns off. So there's a very low levels of exposure for very short periods of time. But we can't get those here. And when I contacted people and asked them, why couldn't we use them? You can't even import them. They said the reason for that was that they interfere with wireless technology, which is absolute BS. How could something that's seldom on interfere with wireless technology, especially if you set the frequency? So we're being given bogus information, and very, very disturbing. It's all about money. Yeah.
Can I make a comment about that?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Comment about that. The old 900 megahertz cell phones that we had years ago were the same technology that they have in Europe. And I actually have recommended to some people that they buy on eBay an old 900 megahertz cell phone that only
Cordless phone.
Cordless, sorry. Yeah, cordless. Thank you. That only transmits when you push the call button on the unit. And I've seen them on eBay. People keep selling them and they're like $10. That is a crazy option, and it's that old crazy thing with the big antenna on it, but at least it's not going to be irradiating you constantly. And I don't understand why we can't have the same technology as Europe. It makes no sense to me whatsoever, because it makes more sense. And the cordless phone, it's absolutely lethal. When you say, and it, as you say, Magda, you can walk down the block and use your cordless phone. It's your own private cell tower. So that's one of the first things that went when we did an inspection on a home.
Thank you, Ross.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Right here. Hi there. There was at the beginning, we didn't see your screen being shared. Can you share with us what was the website that you were talking about? But we didn't see what, and you were talking very fast and I couldn't write it down. It was within the first 5 minutes.
Are you talking about the Electrosensitive Society.com website?
No, you said that one later on. It was at the first 5 minutes. I don't know if it was, yeah, I'm not sure what it was about now. That was a while ago.
Okay.
And
There
also,
was safe living technology. Oh, I was okay. Right at the beginning, there was a Zori Glacier website that I mentioned.
that was the one.
Yeah, so it's www.zori, ZORY, Glacier, GLASER.com.
Okay, great. Thank you. And do you also recommend that same meter that Ross was talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, Gigahertz Solutions, Safe Living Technologies, they're producing phenomenal technology. I actually just recently got the millimeter wave meter, and I haven't tested it yet. In Canada, we're not supposed to have millimeter waves yet because they have an auction, and they haven't had the auction yet. But I've been told by other people who have purchased the meter is that they're picking it up from cars. So cars are actually they have radar associated with them, and it's in the order of about 18 gigahertz, which is just below the limit of that particular new meter, the millimeter. I think it starts at 20 gigahertz. So it's not picking up the entire signal, but it's picking up a part of the signal. And so we're already exposed to it. And they found this out because people who were electrosensitive said, you know, I'm getting something from this car. It's making me feel sick. And then they, you know, everyone would bring up their meters, and none of the meters detected it because it was within a range that wasn't detectable by the meters. And so when Rob developed his millimeter wave meter and he tested it, they were beginning to pick that up. And that's when they realized that there are frequencies that none of the meters will measure, but knowing what some of those frequencies are is really, really critical.
Yeah, okay, last and final question.
I live where I have a very poor cell signal. And so a lot of the times I'll have a half a bar or 1 bar, and a lot of the times it's a 0 with nothing in it. If I go to my kitchen window where a smart meter, a radio off smart meter had been installed, that's where I have to go if I want to send a text, or if a text comes through. I've been told that because I have this poor cell signal, that my exposure is actually a lot higher than it would be if I lived in the city and you know had good cell bars. So half the time it's buffering, and I'm just wondering if that's true. Is it true that I'm holding this and I'm waiting? Oh, you know, am I trying to send this text off? Is it worse for me than by not having the strong cell signal?
Yeah, not having a strong signal is fantastic because it means, you know, the radiation's further away, and so your normal level of exposure is going to be much lower because you're not getting radiated. However, when you're using your cell phone will power up or down depending on how close it is to an antenna. And so if the signal is very poor, it's going to power up, which means when it sends that message, you know, the text message, it's going to be that much more powerful. But for a split second, right? While you're sending it. So if you had a choice of living in an area where you had good cell phone reception versus poor cell phone reception, I'd pick the poor cell phone reception every time.
Yeah.
However, when you're using your cell phone, while you're using it and sending messages, the levels of radiation are actually going to be higher than they would be if you were closer to a cell tower.
And as well as probably when they're buffering, they're looking for that, or is that,
Correct.
and that's probably, yeah. And then do you believe that there would be a connection then? Because like years previous, friends would come over, oh, I can't get a cell. And I said, I don't know, go walk around. And that was always the case. No cell signal whatsoever in my house. As soon as, when I wasn't home, you know, I bought the smart meters. As soon as I wasn't home, they put the radio off meter right outside my kitchen window. That's where my cell phone works now. And so I think there's got to be a connection with that as well, right? Because
Possibly. Yeah.
So I don't like that either.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Magda. This was incredible. Thank you again. I think we can just move on with our lunch break right now. And yeah, unbelievable information, right? Incredible. Thanks again. So, and yeah, it was overwhelming almost. Yes, exactly. All right, so then we would like to just close for lunch right now. Thanks again. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Magda. And here's your applause. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. And so your host is Geoengineering Free Canada. We hope we can put a halt and a stop on all these unsafe technologies. Thanks again. Thank you, and see you again. Bye-bye. Bye.